there's a misconception that, we do this work because it feels good. We're the helpers of communities. We like to show up and we like to serve other people, right? But I think we need to do a better job of reevaluating what real impact means. Just because we raise the next year of funding and we get more donations and we have to engage with our fundraisers does not mean that we're actually having an impact. And you kind of sum this up in two simple words. You said, so what? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we look at the framework of everything we've been doing here at Zero and even before then. As I always try and ask people, like, what is our core impact? So at Zero, there were lots of things that we tracked and paid attention to. I was like, but what are we really trying to do? And people would say stuff and I'd be like, okay, we want to help people in support groups. For what? So what? For that. And what we realized is as we started to ask questions, you work your way down or up sort of the impact ladder. And, hey, public health nerds or research nerds, we have X number of people that go to our support groups. That's an output, and they're satisfied or they think it helps them. That's an outcome. That's great. But the impact is usually
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. Today's a really important episode because we're going to talk about a few elements that seem to be lost in our society today. What does impact truly mean? What does it mean to pursue greatness? And what does accountability mean when it comes to impacting lives in our communities and really having a sustainable impact in our community as well? Today, I am joined by the CEO of Zero Prostate Cancer. Courtney Bugler is with me here today. Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting today.
So, Courtney, what is the biggest misconception that we kind of have about prostate cancer today? If we were just having a conversation, what do people have wrong?
Well, I think the first issue is that many people don't think of it at all. So that's the first problem. But I think, one of the biggest misconceptions is kind of what is the face of prostate cancer? And I think for a long time, if you did think about prostate cancer, you thought of it as like sort of some, older white gentleman, like maybe your grandfather. For a long time, it was sort of like prostate cancer is a cancer that you die with, not from. But in reality, much like a lot of other cancers, the face of this disease is changing. And, we get a lot of people who are younger, who are under 50, who have kids at home or who are at the prime of their careers. And it's really not a disease of just old men. And I think that's one of our greatest challenges is that's probably kept us from having the urgency that we really need to have.
And do you feel like that is because of the male persona and the stigma? I know in our previous conversation, you said something incredibly impactful. You said, often when women are diagnosed with cancer, they look at it as something that they're going to have to live with for the rest of their lives. But when men get things like prostate cancer, they look at it like it's something to overcome and move on from, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Why do you think we've come to that in our society?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely, I sort of joke that this job is every day is a study in gender dynamics. And part of that, and part of the reason why I was brought to Zero was because I'm an almost 20-year breast cancer survivor. And so I was brought to kind of bring the fire of the pink ribbons to prostate cancer. For example, if you're listening to this, I bet you probably know when everything gets turned pink because your grocery store is full of it. But you probably don't know that the month before it is prostate cancer awareness month because nothing's there. And it's true. I do think that my first mentor once said to me, never underestimate the power of pissed off women. And as I say to my constituents a lot, I don't think we've gotten pissed off enough. And I do think it has to do with how men and women approach diseases, approach those sort of challenges. But what that's meant is this sort of army of women in their survivorship who have sort of said, our lives are forever changed and we want to talk about it and we won't be ignored about it. And there's probably a whole discussion about the sexualization and commercialization of the pink ribbon, which is a podcast for another day. But you combine all of those things, and what that really meant is that there was this sort of pink juggernaut that kept going about 20 years ago. And what that meant is it meant an investment in awareness. It meant an investment in talking about it. It meant the changing in how people are screened. I mean, I turned 40 and somebody said it's time to get a mammogram. And I was like, just kidding. I've been doing it for 12 years already. But that kind of investment in money and effort and awareness is just not there in prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is about 20 years behind, probably. And what's a shame about that is all of that awareness, and there's some double-edged sword to that in the pink ribbon community, but it drove dollars, it drove investment, which drove science, it drove research. And so the science in breast cancer is so much further ahead. And so it's kind of like a snowball effect that keeps happening and happening. But yeah, so what that means now is it's really common for a woman to come out and say, I had breast cancer, and show pictures and show this. And yet when men are diagnosed with prostate cancer, or even worse, for those who are part of like LGBTQIA communities where there's even greater stigma, so anyone with a prostate, that tends to still be kind of pushed under. And that means that we don't have that army of advocates that sort of demand not to be ignored.
It has to piss you off, right? When you talk about in the very beginning, like there's no more powerful force than the pissed off woman. I completely agree. It has to make you so upset to see how many people are being impacted. One thing that I think we should share from a statistic about prostate cancer is there are as many men being diagnosed with prostate cancer as there are women being diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yeah, they're both the number one cancers that are diagnosed in their relative sex. And give or take a few thousand here or there, and about the same number, a few more thousand women, but about the same number of men and women die from those respective diseases. And so again, that's coming from a background of a lot of women's health, right, where you're sort of demanding to be heard, and there is a ton of stigma around how women are treated in the healthcare community. However, it is interesting once I got in here, and I will admit I was pulled in because my father's living with prostate cancer. And I looked around and I said, quite honestly, holy shit, what have we gotten into? And again, I think that's the face of the disease is very different. I used to sort of say that in breast cancer, I mean, if you look around and you look at images, you look at commercials, you look at things, you don't see my grandmother in the pictures. You see a 30-something-year-old woman with 2 kids. Or you see a bald woman who's pregnant. When I started in breast cancer, I started in an organization for young women specifically. And we were highly prized because our faces and our stories were the ones that drove urgency and wanted to be told. And that just hasn't happened in prostate cancer. And it allows that stigma to just sort of fester. I have multiple people who, when they started at Zero, they share the story, and myself included, where when I said I'm coming over here, people come out of the woodwork and go, yeah, I was diagnosed, 10 years ago. I've been living with it for 5 years, and never once speak it aloud. And rarely does that happen on the breast cancer side.
So in 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast and said for the first time since the 60s, had an announcement for the public. In the 60s, he talked about the danger of cigarette smoke to the people of the United States. In 2022, he said, the biggest threat to the American society is not another viral pandemic like COVID, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. I continue to think about the stigma, the elements of feeling isolated, the fear that men have in even admitting that they're dealing with a diagnosis like prostate cancer. I'll give you a perfect example. You said your father's living with prostate cancer. My father's living with prostate cancer. So 100% of the people in this room have been impacted, right, by prostate cancer. When he was impacted, what was the first thing that he did? He's one of the most jovial, outgoing. Honestly, when we were younger, I used to tell him that he has a holler outburst disorder, HOD, because he always wants to yell and be the guy in the room that has the most attention. When he got his diagnosis, the exact opposite thing happened. He became very secluded. He became retracted from us. He wasn't sending his morning text messages. I knew something was going on. But to this day, I asked him, how did you feel in that moment? He said, Keenan, I was scared shitless. So what did I do? I kept it to myself. I didn't have people I felt comfortable being able to reach out to other than the friends who I know were brave enough to say, I have prostate cancer. I'm dealing with this diagnosis. And it seems like in order to get past this, we have to create the safe space of community and connection for men to raise their hand and admit that it's okay not to be okay. Because statistically, we're probably not going to be okay.
Well, and there are tons of statistics around the greater risk if you've been diagnosed with prostate cancer for mental health issues, for suicide. So they are intertwined. And what's interesting is that in our work at Zero, so for example, we have the largest community of prostate cancer specific support groups in the country. And actually one of the largest communities of a disease specific support group. We have over 150 support groups around the country. And what we know of, and I sort of joked that on day 4 of when I started at Zero about 18 months ago, I went to our training for our support group leaders. And within about a minute and a half, someone was giving me some very graphic information about their treatment and their side effects and things. And, my first reaction was like, okay, here we go. Because I'd been in breast cancer, so I wasn't fazed by any of it. But what it reminded me is in the power of community, when people feel like they're safe, men do open up. But they need to see themselves in the community. And so one of the things that I think we do at Zero really well is we create that community for people to feel safe. We have programs where you can have one-on-one mentoring. You can do things online so you can still be sort of anonymous. You can, there's lots of ways for people to get that kind of support. And we're actually going to be growing that in the next year or so. And I often joke in my own personal cancer experience that, my doctors might have saved my lives, but it was my peers. It was sort of what I refer to as my pink mafia that saved my soul. And they're the ones who really helped me. And this epidemic of loneliness that is happening both with men and also with younger generations. And of course, as those younger generations become more at risk for cancers, including prostate, that inability to find connection or to feel like they can find connection, or if you are in a marginalized community, there are, a disproportionate number of Black men who are, not married or partnered. And therefore, they don't have that person who lives with them to kind of walk them through it. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And unfortunately, at Zero, one of the things that we have to get better at, and I think all organizations do, is, especially smaller ones, we're the largest patient-centered prostate cancer organization, but we're not as big as the breast cancer organizations, is we have sort of been too reliant on people to find us. And especially if you are, isolating yourself in that shell, you're not going to reach out. So we have to be much more proactive in the community organizations, healthcare organizations, across the gamut to not let people retreat into themselves. Because there is data that shows that isolation can impact their survival. On the flip side, I'm never going to tell you that you have to have a positive attitude and that you have to be happy, and that's going to, because quite honestly, cancer freaking sucks. And the last thing I want to do is sort of survivor or patient shame and say that you have to have a happy face all the time, because it's just that's not real. But what we need to do is, and it's why everyone needs an advocate, is we have to reach out and grab them as they are retreating and show them that there is a community where it's safe. Because what we do see at Zero is when they do feel safe, then they definitely open up. And I think that's something that, is across sort of the men's health space as a whole. these issues are not necessarily unique to prostate cancer, although I will say, based on, where the cancer is found and sometimes some of the side effects of some of the treatments, it impacts them in a different way. I think we have some things in common with our, testicular cancer friends, and some of the stigma around, for example, colorectal cancer, which thankfully has moved further ahead, but still has a lot of shame and stigma around it, right? Like, it's interestingly enough, we'll share all of our own issues on social media, but when it comes to anything sort of from the waist, to the top of the thighs, we all get real weird about it.
We really do. One thing that I think is important to recognize is you were brought in as a leader who has a vision to transform the organization. And you had a really important saying. You said, we are proud, but we are dissatisfied in where we're at. What does that mean? Proud, but dissatisfied?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I'm just not the person you call for incremental anything. It's just not my jam. And the potential for what we can do and the lives we can save and change is so great, that it's an exciting opportunity to be at my organization. And I will admit that I took this from a colleague, a friend of mine who works for ALS, a disease that everyone does die from. And he came and spoke to our team, and he said, when you live in that environment, it's never enough. We have to do more. And so, but I liked how he really phrased it. We can be proud of what we've done so far. And when I came into Zero, Zero has been around for over 20 years. It's grown. It's done amazing work. But as long as there's somebody diagnosed tomorrow who doesn't get the help they need, and as long as there's somebody who is, 2 people are going to die while we have this conversation, then we have not done enough. And so we want to be proud of how far we've come. But as long as those people are still there, it is not enough. And so one of the things that I've been really proud of is, and of course, as an organization and as a leader, you celebrate the wins. By no means are we just, but we have built a team, and we're continuing to build a team that are never satisfied. And anything can always be better. It can always be bigger. We can always be more accountable, more transparent. And what I'm really proud of is in the last year and a half is we've really started to change the culture at our organization, where we're sort of a culture of builders. And that's not been without its challenges, from an organizational perspective, and from a change management perspective. But I think that's what our patients and our survivors and our community would want. The ones who really give back and start to get involved, they're doing that for the next person, not just for themselves. And I just come from a place where I can't look a survivor in the eye and say, yeah, we're doing pretty good. Isn't that enough? Because it's not.
Do you think that comes, and this is a little bit of a personal question, I apologize, but do you think that comes from your personal diagnosis, right? When my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, it really put everything into scope for me. Holy shit, this life is not infinite. And if we want to make impact, we need to take action now. Do you think that's a part of why you're such a get shit done motivator?
I think some of it is natural. I'm a go big or go home kind of person anyway. But, my staff will say, and again, prostate cancer when caught early has a really great survival rate. But I come from a community in cancer that doesn't have that great things. And so, in the 18 months that I've been here, not only have we lost people in the prostate cancer community, but I have personally lost 4 friends that I've been friends with who were diagnosed when I was 20 years ago. And every time I have to take a day off of work to go to a funeral or to help someone with end of life care, I come back and say, what the fuck are we doing? And whether it's breast cancer, prostate cancer, whatever, but it is, I will say, before I came to nonprofits, I was writing for television. I was writing soap operas. I could have told you how to come back from the dead and steal someone's baby and be an evil twin. But there is something that fundamentally changes when you have dozens of friends die before you're 40 that I think changes you. I live a life that is constantly touched by grief. How I usually manifest that grief, as thousands of dollars in therapy would tell me, is I get pissed off. I'm not sure I've gained acceptance at any of it. And one of the reasons, for example, that I've moved in and out of breast cancer is, quite honestly, sometimes it's too personal. And this is a way to be sort of personal yet adjacent for me. But I do think that, there's a reason why, if you look at nonprofits as a whole, it's full of people who got involved because they became personally connected by that cause. And I think that's what drives that. On the flip side, if I'm going to put on my business hat, I think it's also what makes the world think that we should all do it for free, and and anybody can do it, and people don't have to be qualified. But again, a podcast for another day. But it is something that, I start too many meetings with a moment of silence of somebody we've lost. And that's, we can't control everything. And I'm not personally in a lab, finding a cure. But I can certainly advocate for the dollars. I can certainly speak to the policymakers, and I can certainly make the system and the healthcare landscape that they work in better. And that fuels the ambition. I'm probably an ambitious person anyway, but there's a reason why at Zero, we've sort of reevaluated some of our core values, and they're about to be launched, but spoiler alert, ambition is one of them, because the cause demands it. And as long as I still get an email or a text once a week where somebody says, hey, I have somebody who's been diagnosed with prostate cancer and they're freaking out, how can you help? Then we got work to do.
So my question for you is, in the nonprofit space, right, there's a misconception that, we do this work because it feels good. We're the helpers of communities. We like to show up and we like to serve other people, right? But I think we need to do a better job of reevaluating what real impact means. Mm-hmm. Just because we raise the next year of funding and we get more donations and we have to engage with our fundraisers does not mean that we're actually having an impact. And you kind of sum this up in two simple words. You said, so what? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we look at the framework of everything we've been doing here at Zero, and even before then, as I always try and ask people, what is our core impact? So at Zero, there were lots of things that we tracked and paid attention to. I was like, but what are we really trying to do? And people would say stuff, and I'd be like, okay, we want to help people in support groups. For what? So what? For that. And what we realized is, as we started to ask questions, you work your way down or up sort of the impact ladder. And, hey, public health nerds or research nerds, we have X number of people that go to our support groups. That's an output, and they're satisfied or they think it helps them. That's an outcome. That's great. But the impact is usually, or if we're going to get, we could also talk for-profit leading indicators, lagging indicators, those kinds of things. But in the end, what are we really trying to get to? So at Zero, we really talked about, if I can't, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon from what we're doing to 3 core impacts, then we've got to reevaluate if it's what we should be doing. So for us, it's, there's a disturbing trend in prostate cancer that people are being diagnosed later. And again, when it's later, it is not curable. So we wanted to decrease these late stage diagnoses, which meant that we have to be much more involved in the sort of the early detection game. And quite honestly, our friends in breast cancer and colon cancer have been talking that talk for 20 years. And in prostate cancer, for various reasons, we haven't. But we do know that there is a disturbing trend, especially in certain populations, that they're being diagnosed too late. So we have to drive people to be diagnosed earlier. And quite honestly, even that is a leading indicator. It's not the final impact. But the next thing is we want people to live longer with this disease if they have it, or if they have had it in the past, and better, because the disease does impact quality of life. And I am here to tell you, as a person who, with my own disease, was probably overtreated, and it has grossly impacted my quality of life 20 years later. It's a trade-off, and that's a trade-off that's important to discuss. But we want people to live longer and better. And there are ways to measure that we quite honestly suck at. So we've been really talking about how do we measure that? And there's some ways to do it. That's going to probably be a multi-year plan for how we do that. But eventually, how do we show that our work here leads to less people dying? And, if we do our job properly, because there is some data, and we're going to get much more involved in sort of our own research to show this. I know that there are people who, because they go to support groups, will live longer and better and eventually won't die. That's anecdotal, right? There's some research, but it's because they got information that they should ask their doctors. They pushed to get a second opinion. They got a treatment they wouldn't have normally asked for. Or they got a way to handle their side effects, which meant that their marriage stayed together. Any of these cancers that impact sex and intimacy have a disproportionately large impact on relationships. And so, but we at Zero, and I would say we as nonprofits, are not always great at measuring that. And when I was a chief marketing officer, for example, I sat down with my team and they were like, we have all this social media engagement. I was like, yeah, so what? Well, it's great. Our community's engaged. Okay. But what do you want them to do next? Because just like, you go girl on a post doesn't do anything. And they're like, well, but then I was like, doesn't save anybody's life. Doesn't lead them to take the next action. Again, marketing hat. What's our conversion? What's our call to action? And, kind of like old school media impressions. For media impressions, sure, that's a great way to count. But if I can't show that actually changed or saved someone's life, we either shouldn't be doing it or we're doing it wrong. And I think that too many people don't ask those questions because it's hard. I mean, I'm going to be transparent. We suck at it, and it's going to take us years to figure it out. They're too afraid that they won't get funded if they're transparent about we're bad at this. One of the things that we did at Zero is we have one of the largest run walk series. It's sort of the largest men's health series in the country. And when I arrived, we had 50 of them. And they're great. And I used to be the national director for Komen's Race for the Cure. So I love a good, 5K. But when we got there, a lot of them weren't making money. They didn't have a lot of people at them. And I was like, what are we trying to do with them? And what we got was a lot of people in the community were really invested in them because they made them, the people who went felt good about it. But it wasn't growing by people. So we weren't bringing more people into the fold. It wasn't translating into greater investment in the mission. But it meant that the people who were there felt really good. But we weren't growing more of them, and they weren't taking any of the next action. And we were spending a disproportionate amount of our budget on staffing these events. When I arrived at Zero, we had more fundraisers than we had people who were working in mission. And we are a direct service organization.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So, I want to tie a little analogy into this. So there was a famous experiment that scientists ran with 4 monkeys. They put 4 monkeys in a cage, and they put a ladder in the middle of the cage. And what they did is they put bananas at the top of the ladder. Monkeys crawl up, they eat the bananas. The second time the scientists put the bananas in the cage or on top of the ladder, the monkeys start crawling up, and they shock them with electricity, and they douse them with cold water. Okay, so eventually none of those monkeys want to go up because they associate getting shocked with cold water and climbing that ladder. They replace one of the monkeys. So you get a brand new monkey who hasn't been a part of the experiment. It tries to climb up to the top, And the other monkeys grab it, pull it down, start beating it up because they don't want to get shocked and doused with cold water. That experiment continues where now you have 4 new monkeys in the cage. And guess what? By the time they put the new bananas at the top of the ladder, none of the monkeys will climb the ladder. And they say, why don't we climb after the ladder? And they say, exactly. This is just how we've always done it.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering if you think about the impact and like the, hey, why are we doing these things? And you get an answer, well, this is how we've always done it. But does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think any new leader comes into anywhere, for-profit, nonprofit, and they'll hear that, right? And I heard that at Zero. I'm going to give my team credit, though. Most of them recognize that they shouldn't do it anymore, but they weren't quite sure how to get out of it. When I worked at, I haven't worked there in a while, so I can share this story. When I worked at Susan G. Komen, I was brought in to transform this national event series. And I asked my team and some people, I go, what's getting in the way? And they all said, fear. We're afraid of screwing up. We're afraid of doing it wrong. The series was declining. There was a lot of other things going on. And they had just been afraid to make any moves lest it be the wrong move. And quite honestly, in some ways, that team was so used to not winning that they had forgotten what winning looked like, and they'd certainly forgot what it felt like. And so Zero's a little bit different environment because there were a lot of things that they were like, we shouldn't be doing this way. We just need someone to break us out of the mold to do it. So, that's, for-profit, nonprofit, the disruptors. I think what also happens is depending on your funding source, I'm blessed at Zero. We have a really diverse funding, but if you are government funded, I'm not sure they're driving you for innovation right there. If you are, if you get a lot from large family foundations and they've been giving you the same amount year after year, you're sort of afraid to upset the apple cart, right? So one of the things that I think has been fun here at Zero is we have a nice diverse set, but there's still a lot that we haven't touched. And again, because the cause and the need is so great, there's actually a lot of opportunity. And it allows us to kind of like keep doing what we're doing with those that feel comfortable with how we're doing it while going to the new places who don't have that same mindset. But on the flip side, I'm going to say, as a fundraiser, who often for many years would say, well, no money, no mission, right? I don't really think about it that way anymore. I think about it as big mission will drive the dollars. And if you put people want to be a part of big, bold things. They do. And it's scary, and you got to be really transparent. We're about to launch this huge initiative, and I looked our lead funder in the eye and said, we are going to screw this up somewhere. You need to give us this money knowing that we are going to screw it up. Because some of the things that we are trying to do, no one's done in prostate cancer before. And we're going into communities that have a hard time trusting. And you must know, like this is what we hope to happen. And we're piloting some things. Like you must know that some of what you're giving us money for, we are going to tell you that didn't work, so we're not going to do it anymore. And you must know that we're going to come to you at some point and say, this is taking longer than we thought. I'm going to be, but what you can guarantee is I will be transparent with you about it. We will come to you when it's happening. We will raise our hand before it gets too late. And we will be your partner in sharing that with you. But if you want to do things that are new and big and bold, to expect them to go perfectly is stupid. And thankfully, they're like, yeah, okay. And we set some very baseline parameters, like you've got to at least do this, because we got to at least be able to show that we're doing what we say we're doing. But every potential partner in this initiative, I have gone to them and said, I'm telling you, it will not go perfectly. And the feedback that we are getting now, at the same time, I'm also showing people, we've hired people, we're elevating certain things. So it's not like we're a bunch of yahoos who don't have any idea. At Zero, we have purposely hired, since I arrived, my entire senior team has turned over. And we are hiring kind of VP and director levels. And the number one thing that we've hired in those are people who come from bigger places who know how to do it already.
Oh, wow.
So you know, like, here's the people, and you're investing in the people as much as you are, right? So if anybody's in sales or leadership, you know, people give to people. So they got to trust that you're going to do it that way. And, you know, I'm not sure I would go with this. Like, I can't go to a very, very regimented healthcare foundation necessarily with this tact. You know, we need to show some data first before we go to some other people. And in fact, that's what we're telling some of our key kind of partners. We need the first 20 because you're going to give us the data we need to go get the next 100. We're not ready to go to those people yet. You're going to help us, which of course every funder wants to hear too, because they want to know that they're not going to be the ones perpetually funding you forever and you're going to go find the other money. But I think that some of that is being really honest, and at least in the environment that we've been in, we have been told that candor is refreshing. Now, come to me in 2 years, and if we've screwed it all up, well, that's a whole different other topic. But people want to be a part of big, bold things. Like, our funders are bored if we come to them with the same crap.
I mean, this is a huge part, Courtney, of being able to attract those highly talented people who have been there before. You have to cast that vision where they can see themselves being successful in the vision that you cast.
Yeah, and as we've been hiring, the team jokes. I spend the first half an hour of any interview of a leadership role, and I try to scare them away. I tell them, here's all the things that are terrible. You're not going to have this. This isn't in place. You don't have this team. You don't have that. Like, I try to make them run. And then if they look at me and they go, well, that sounds like fun, then they have passed the first hurdle. We just met with somebody recently, and I tried to scare them away. And he said, man, bring it on. And again, that's the culture of building, the culture of ambition, not being afraid of the mess. And again, to Zero's credit, Zero is doing a great job. Again, proud but dissatisfied. A great job. But where we need to be, nope, not even close to ready. I have to give my board some real props. I think if you're a leader in a nonprofit, you got to have a great partner and a board. And one of the things that my board said to me was when I came into them and I said, okay, like, we're doing some good things, but there's a bunch of things we're not doing. And they looked at me and they said, and this is sort of any new leader, right? They go, how long do you think it's going to take to kind of get the team in place that you want, to kind of get things just ready to do the things? And I said, probably 2 years. And I'm about 18 months in. We're seeing the shoots of the things, but we're probably right on track about 2 years. And you got to be prepared for the, what I like to say, the messy middle. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever, if you read like Marie Kondo and that, you know, the book about what sparks joy. And her whole thing is like, if you're trying to organize your house, you got to take everything you have. You got to find all the scissors in your house, put them in a pile. Because quite honestly, half the time you don't even know how many pairs of scissors you have. So you don't do it by room, you do it by stuff. And you got to throw it in the middle. And you got to look at it. You got to go, holy shit, I have 18 pairs of scissors. Like, I had no idea. And then you realize, well, some of the scissors are like my kid's scissors from when he was in first grade. And we don't really need those little scissors anymore. So those don't work for us anymore. And then you're like, oh, these are kind of like rusty scissors. Or in the case of my house, you're hearing my dogs. I have 3 big dogs. I have like a pair of scissors that I just use when like I got to like cut a pine cone out of my dog. Okay, well, those don't get used by any other things, right? Like, and then I'm like, oh, but these scissors I really like. These are great for wrapping paper. You know, like they cut right through. And so, right, like those are like special scissors, right? And what they say is you got to look and you got to see, do I need everything? Do these have very specific uses? Do I need, is there one that I can use across that? Like, no, I don't think my wrapping paper scissors and my dog scissors can serve dual purposes, but other things can. And then they also say you got to look and you got to say, like, do any of these things still sort of spark joy? So if it's clothes, right? Throw all your clothes in a pile. This doesn't fit anymore. My God, the last time I wore this was in 1997. And my mother told me that if I was young enough to wear it the first time, I might be too old to wear it the second time. I hate this color. I mean, when I left breast cancer the first time, I literally threw out almost everything that was pink because I couldn't look at it again. This doesn't fit. Oh my God, I didn't even realize I had this. And this is a sweater I love and it's always been in the back and I never get to see it, right? And so you bring the things you love to the forefront. But in the meantime, damn, that's a big ass mess in the middle of your floor. But over time, you start to put things away. And so if you were to go to I did a blog for Zero recently and I talked about, we are in the messy middle. We spent the last, year throwing everything on the floor and being like, that works. That doesn't work. That could work better. Oh God, we love this and our constituents love this. And it really it touches hearts and minds and we can't lose that because that's part of who we are. And we're starting to put things away now. So there's less mess on the floor and we're starting to see, and there's room in the closet now for the new things that we need to put away. And that sort of metaphor for me, especially when you're trying to drive organizational change, is really helpful because first of all, it tells you that the mess isn't forever. It serves a purpose because you cannot, people talk about you have to be able to measure things, right? And I'm a big believer that there is no accountability without visibility. We all have to see it. And only then can we realize, maybe that's not as effective as it could be. Or we just need it in a different size because, by the way, my butt's too big for that now. So I just need it to be bigger. But I would love it if it was bigger.
Courtney, I can't help but see the connections between the demographic of people who your organization serves and the mentality of the organization. Transparency, vulnerability, being clear with what our mission is, the impact that we're making. Do you think it's maybe subconscious that some of these characteristics are also the things that we're looking for from the demographic of men who can raise their hand and be transparent, can be vulnerable about where they're at in the process, can recognize that this is only part of the healing journey to get us to where we're trying to get to? I make those connections in my mind as you're speaking.
Yeah. And I also think that's, yes. I also just think that values are values and we have to live what we, what we believe. I mean, if you were to actually ask me kind of what are my own personal values, I would say some of these align, right? But I think that when you are trying to build trust, and nonprofits, our greatest value is our credibility and our trust. Unlike a brand where there are plenty of brands where people don't really trust them, but they love the product. So they're going to keep it rolling, right? And again, that's a podcast for another day. But our currency, our greatest asset is our trust and our credibility. It's part of the reason why for-profits want to partner with nonprofits. They want to take advantage of that halo effect of a nonprofit's credibility. And I believe that you build credibility and trust by being open. I think you do that with your team, right? After I do this podcast, I'm going and every 2 weeks I do open office hours with my entire staff. And they could come and they can ask me anything. And especially the first year I worked here, some of those questions were spicy. And sometimes I couldn't get into everything, but I would always be saying I can't tell you everything about that now, but let me tell you what I can. Or I understand you may not get this now. Let me give you whatever context I can. But I believe that you build trust and credibility by being honest and transparent. Some people would probably say I'm sometimes too transparent, but I'd rather err on the side of being too transparent and clean up the mess later. You also need to build in a community, like people need to assume good intent. If they, and I believe quite honestly in our current environment, not enough people assume good intent. But I think you go a long way if you build trust, and I would say that there are probably people who are not quite there yet with me. But then when you screw up, and invariably every organization, you screw up with, and rarely is it intentional, you at least have built some currency in the bank for them to go, well, we know you didn't mean to. Like, and yes, this sucks, but we're going to give you another chance, right? Like if you think about any brand that you love and, they lose your package or whatever, you're like, yeah, okay. Sometimes, there was a huge storm, or yep, you're right. My package happened to be the one that fell off the truck, or, like you assume that they meant to get it to you on time, at least most of the time. And I think that when you're trying to drive change, if people know that your heart's in the right place and that you're being honest about where you want to be, and you're honest about where you might have screwed up in the past, I think that's really important. That, again, is a whole nother topic, as a white leader in an organization that's sometimes trying to reach, communities of color. Zero hasn't always been that great at it. And so I spent a lot of time at the beginning talking to a lot of communities and a lot of people who looked at this woman with her Karen haircut and said, why the hell should we give a shit what you say? And you have to own it. But I think that also gives you currency, that when you drive hard decisions, I mean, if you were to ask my staff, like, they'll tell you the flip side of, proud but dissatisfied is I demand excellence. Now, we may not always reach it all the time, but at least that is excellence is the aspiration. And certainly, we are going to ask you to level up. And we are going to ask more of everyone because the cause demands it. But I don't think that's just a nonprofit thing. I mean, if I were to sit here at a group of, Fortune 500 CEOs, I would hope that when they come into an organization, how you build trust and credibility, that's universal.
Yeah. So one of the traditions that we have here on the podcast, Courtney, is our previous guest wanted to ask you a blind question as we put the wheels down to land it here. So our previous guest is big in the technology space, and he referenced the NVIDIA CEO, big company, $1 trillion company. He, the CEO of NVIDIA, has a company culture where he embraces pain and suffering. He says, if we are going to be as good as we want to be, the road will not be easy. And we will learn our biggest lessons through the pain and suffering and getting to where we need to get to. Do you think that pain and suffering has a place even in the nonprofit sector because you guys want to be excellent?
I'm not sure I'd call it pain and suffering. Because I'll use an example. I was once at a nonprofit and morale was really bad. And I went to my boss, and I was sort of the number two. And I said, we got a problem with morale. And, our numbers suck. And I was a fundraiser, like all these things are sucking. And I was like, we got to do something. And his answer was, well, get the numbers up and then the morale would be better. And I looked at him and I said, I disagree. Because I think people who feel valued, people who are, and again, don't get me wrong, hard work, sometimes it is going to suck. I mean, I do agree with that part. But I think that people who feel seen and valued and are happy at least with where they're going and know that it may not last forever will work harder will put in the extra time, will, because again, I think the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is I do believe nonprofits should be paid for what they're worth, but we're not here just for the paycheck, because I could go to for-profits and make 3 times more, well, probably even more than that. So I do think that uncomfortableness is a part of the process. I'm not sure I would advocate for a culture of pain and suffering. And I would say part of that is because, quite honestly, our mission is full of pain and suffering. And so, if I'm miserable everywhere, how can I help someone not be miserable? On the flip side, I will say, like, if you're going to be excellent, it's not always going to be pretty. But people have got to know that it's not going to be forever either. And let's be transparent. I've been here for 18 months. Almost half of my staff has turned over in 18 months. For various reasons, right? Like some, they've just moved on. Some probably didn't like the direction we were going, which either higher expectations or what we were asking them. We've made some choices to move people along. And that's, if you walk into a place and you go, you know what, this isn't the family that I joined, because I also don't believe businesses, for-profits or nonprofits, we're not families, we're teams. And so it's okay if you're like, hey, this isn't the team that I want to be on. So there's an element to it I think I agree with, but I don't believe that being miserable in pain and suffering is the way to keep people. Because I'm not in a for-profit, because I don't have shares or ownership or huge bonuses to keep people. I've got to keep them different ways. And so I think that's where we're sort of different. But I think that embrace the uncomfortable, certainly. And I'm sure if you were to talk to some people who work here now or have left, they might tell you that I agree with what he said. But I don't. That uncomfortable can't be forever. And not everybody is like me. Like, not everybody is drawn to the flames of chaos, like perhaps I am. And a really well-run business, because a nonprofit is a business. It takes all kinds. And if you are only catering to that one kind, you are missing out on amazing skills and contributions that you wouldn't necessarily have.
Courtney, it is so easy for everybody who's tuning in, watching, and listening today to understand why you are the definition of Heart and Hustle, for the things that you guys are doing at Zero, from your leadership style, for how you are holding yourself and the team accountable to the mission and the communities that you serve. It's incredible to see. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Seriously.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.